Good evening. Welcome to Intel 450 at American Public University. I'm Rowan Sharma, and I'll be your instructor for the next 8 weeks. And I'll be having these YouTube lectures every week or so, just so you can see get some FaceTime with me and get a little bit more of an interactive experience. So again, welcome to the class. Hope this class gives you a good understanding of the problem set. And what it should do is move beyond what you see on the news and what you see on Fox and MSNBC on what terrorism is. Terrorism is a more distinctive phenomenon than you can actually sum up in what you see on the evening news. So I hope by the end of the class you have a deep understanding of it. Before I go into what this class is, I just want to cover what this class is not. This class is not a class on how to take back an airplane if it's taken over by terrorists. This class is not link analysis and how to target a terrorist. There's other classes that deal with it. There's other training that can cover it. This class is a class on terrorism as a social phenomenon. It is a class on history, politics, philosophy, policy, and a little bit of law, all mixed up into this class. So we try and cover it from all sorts of angles. Just to highlight again, these YouTube lectures are going to try and give every week or so. Please listen to these YouTube lectures. If you do not listen to them and you answer your papers and you do not take the material from the YouTube lecture, you will not get a good grade. So please listen to these YouTube lectures, watch them. If there's a problem, like you're in Afghanistan, you have low bandwidth, let me know and I can make adjustments for that. But please listen to them. Finally, just to introduce to myself, professor for about a year now at American Public University. I've taught this class 3 times. I've changed a little bit for this quarter because I think I have to give a little bit more of a immersive experience. But what I currently do, my day job, I work at the Department of Defense. I do counter weapons of mass destruction. I was an Army officer for 7 years, did the Iraq and Afghanistan thing, so if you're deployed overseas, I can kind of sympathize with you. And I currently work at Department of Defense, worked as a contractor for the Department of Defense as well. So if you have any questions on working in D.C., working as a contractor, please feel free to shoot them my way. So just starting off with the course syllabus, I just want to start off with the written products. 2 papers, 1,500 to 2,000 words. That's the writing requirement for this. For the writing, I'm going to be grade pretty hard on this because I expect you as now college students to write pretty decently. And I'm looking for a clear thesis with argument to back up your thesis. I'm not looking for Wikipedia entry on terrorism. I'm not looking for an encyclopedia or just data. I'm looking for an argument with data to back it up. If you can't provide that, you will not get a good grade. So that's the critical part. The papers will be handed, the questions will be handed out a week ahead of time. You'll choose 1 question out of 2 or 3, and then hand back the paper the next week. It's pretty simple. So just to cover what the course is, first part is history of terrorism. It's going to be kind of a review of what terrorism is. It's going to cover some of the history, and it's also going to cover what the difference between a terrorist is and what a criminal, an insurgent, an act of war. And we're going to have hopefully some pretty robust debates on what is a terrorist, what is not a terrorist. So that's going to be the first part. Then we cover the midterm. And then the second part is going to be counterterrorism. It's going to use kind of case studies of 9/11, post 9/11 incidents. And we're going to cover how terrorism or how terrorists operate and how the society, in this case will be the United States, failed to pick up the terrorist, or failed, what counterterrorism procedures failed. And your final paper is going to be an analysis of that. It's going to use a case study and going to ask why the counterterrorism program failed. So those how the course is weighed out. In addition to the papers, you have the weekly discussion. What I'm looking for is 200, 250 words. Make a point on your discussion so it's argumentative. Bring something up, find a point, and then have an argument over the paper or over the discussion topic. I'll give you a question, I'll start the ball rolling, and then I expect you to kind of fill in. And just, first week is a freebie. Next week I'm going to ask, what is a terrorist, what is not a terrorist, and go from there. So that's basically the course. Still trying to get the roster all sorted out, but I give some readings that should give some background to familiarize yourself with the subject. So just for the week 1 readings, read them, but skim them. Don't go into too much detail. Next week they'll be a lot more critical. So I just want to start off with terrorist mythbusters, and I bring this up because terrorists are the terrorism literature is corrupted, I think. You have all sorts of people on TV spouting off that they're a terrorism expert. They say one thing and it doesn't really mean anything. And what I'm trying to do is say, what are some mythbusters out there that you might hear on the news but really aren't true? And the first terrorist mythbuster is terrorists are irrational mental cases. You'll hear that on the news. You'll hear that politicians speak. You'll hear that in congressional committees, that terrorists are irrational mental cases. And that's myth number 1. That's not true. Terrorists are very rational. Now, the guy committing a suicide bombing, he might not be, but the guy who sent him to do the suicide bomber is rational. And they have a purpose for what their acts are. And sometimes they achieve their purpose. So it's actually a very rational act, for the most part, that terrorists are doing when they're conducting their attacks. Second myth out there, you'll hear this, jihadi terrorists, Muslim extremists, hate our freedoms, and that's why they're committing our acts. They hate the United States, they hate elections, they hate freedom, and they want to extinguish it. And this was said after 9/11, it was said by George Bush, and that's a myth. Jihadi terrorists don't necessarily hate our freedoms, they hate our policies. Osama bin Laden didn't care that we have a culture in the United States that's implies sexualism and implies gratification and implies monetary greed. He didn't care about that. What he cared about was that U.S. troops were in Saudi Arabia. What he cared about was that U.S. policies were supporting Israel. So whether it's a legitimate grievance or not, these people are not. They don't hate our freedoms. They hate our policies. And that's an important part of terrorism and counterterrorism. So that's myth 2. Myth 3, poverty is a cause of terrorism. Not necessarily. The poorest parts of the world, sub-Saharan Africa, don't have too much terrorism, although there's a terrorism growth in Mali that's going on right now. But for the most part, terrorists, some of them are wealthy. Osama bin Laden was wealthy. Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of Al-Qaeda now, is wealthy. Some of the homegrown extremists that we've seen in whether the Fort Hood shooter or the Times Square bomber, they weren't poor people. They were actually pretty economically affluent. So there's a myth that poverty causes terrorism, and that's not true. Myth 4, terrorism is confined to the Muslim world. You're going to get some readings next week, and the week after. It's going to talk about terrorism in Sri Lanka, terrorism in Israel by Jewish nationalists, terrorism in Europe, and that not committed by Muslims. There are groups out there that commit terrorists, and there's the FARC, there's ETA in Spain, There's others that are not Muslim that use terrorism to achieve a specific goal. And that's why it's popular. That's why it's outside the Muslim world. So that's myth 4. Myth 5, and that's one. Myth 5 is terrorism never works. That is a myth. You hear that all the time. That we'll never let the terrorists change our way of life. That terrorism is it never works. That terrorism is futile. The complete opposite is true. Terrorism works. It works. It achieves a goal. You're going to see a movie in a couple of weeks called One Day in September. And what the goal of the terrorists in that case was to achieve a level of publicity for their cause. And they did. They achieved massive levels of publicity for the Palestinian cause. Sometimes terrorism allows the terrorists to coalesce a movement around them that if they weren't going to do it. For example, Osama bin Laden, after 9/11, because he was seen as a strong person in the Muslim world after the actions of 9/11, he actually temporarily increased his ranks. It worked for him. It works other places. It actually kicks, terrorists against Spain in 2004. The objective was to get Spain out of Iraq. It worked. And it actually, I haven't seen any studies on this, but it probably works more than it doesn't. So that's myth 5. And then the myth 6 is that the victims of terrorism are the targets. The people that die in the terrorist attack, they're targeted by the terrorist, but the target is usually the audience, usually the world stage, that terrorists want to bring publicity to their cause. So they might blow up a airliner, or they might blow up a school bus, and it's tragic for the people that died. But for the terrorists, they've now brought a level of publicity to their action that they would never have achieved. And the target is the media, to get themselves out in the world audience. So that's the sixth myth, and I'll end it at 6 myths there. So that's a good start to the program, or good start to the class. Please introduce yourself on the discussion board, and if you have any issues or questions, please email me. Until I see you next week, have a good week.